Hey everyone, Ravens guy Jan David Sutar here, and I am with Ken McKusick, film study analyst for Russell Street Report. And Ken, thanks again for joining us. And boy, do we have some Ravens football to discuss. So let's dive right in and talk about that offense. Last week you said Ravens needed to score first, score early, and well, we saw that, didn't we? So what did you see out of that very first drive that really made that possible?
Well, terrific drive obviously is keyed by the long pass to Wallace. Had an extra blocker on the play. I think we saw some of that throughout the game, but Boyle stayed into blocks. They had 6, and Wallace ran down the left sideline, ran right by the corner, and did a great job to catch the on-target ball.
Yeah, and then right on that second drive of the second play, we had Alex Callens and going in there. And we had talked last week about him having problems protecting the football. Clearly, the coaches delivered that message. 25-yard game, second play of the second drive. So with what we saw out of the run for this game, what were the big differences there for you?
The entire offensive line played the best game that I have scored in a decade of doing this. So they played during that entire time. They played 163 games. 149 during the regular season and 14 more playoff games. And this was the single best for scoring of that entire period. So they did everything well. They didn't allow a sack. They weren't penalized in the game. They allowed only 2 quarterback hits, several pressures. I forget whether it was 3 or 4 total pressures, 1 run penetration, make it 2. And otherwise, they were great.
You were saying earlier, Mike Wallace had a big day, averaged 44.3 YPR, and all the other receivers pretty much averaged about 5.6. Wallace really just keeps disproving people that he is a one-trick pony.
Well, I mean, he had 3 receptions, and they were all long ones, so that's good. And he was a lot of the offense. I think if you wanted to point to something in Flacco's game that was missing, it's that mid-range passing game still doesn't appear to be there. You know, hitting Perriman for a 20-yard crossing route or getting a ball to Macklin for some yards after the catch. There wasn't any of that. The 5.6 YPR is quite bad. 5.6 Y yards per pass attempt would not be good, but yards per reception is quite poor. So we are taking out the best of his long balls to do that, but still there's a dichotomy there that speaks to an unhealthy mid-range passing game.
I also want to touch on that last-ditch effort from Flacco to Macklin for that beautiful first down. Moving on, the Ravens really gave Flacco some great blocking help, took care of him on the long passes. Throw in some detail about that, what you saw there.
Okay, well, they did some max protection in this game. I mentioned this briefly earlier, but Flacco dropped back 26 times. It's all in about how you use those 5 eligible receivers. So they can go out for a pass, or you could have them block. And then the intermediate choice, where you do both, is you have them chip. So they throw a block as they're going out for a pass. And particularly against a team with very good edge rushers like the Raiders have, chip blocking can be an effective tool. So they did that 10 times during the game, and they had 13 guys who stayed in among their eligible receivers among the 26 pass attempts. So they're using barely over 4.0 fully committed receivers per drop back. So that's low, but it's more like what we saw in Flacco's early years when they did a lot of max protect to give him more time to have plays develop down the field.
Now, you said earlier it was the best offensive line game you have scored in a decade. It really was a beautiful game. What were the highlights that you saw out of that?
Ronnie Stanley had his best game of the season. He only allowed 1 pressure, missed 1 other block as I had it scored. That's an A with or without adjustment. It comes in just short of an A+ as I scored it. Hurst had a fine game, his best game of the year, one of his best career games. He's had a couple decent games over his time here, but this was one of the best. He did get beat for a full charge on a quarterback hit, a third of a charge on another quarterback hit, but otherwise he was excellent. He gets a healthy adjustment for a game where he had 4 highlights, so he really does doing a great job on level 2. He's been asked to pull a lot in Roman's offense, so Roman has a lot of pulls, both short and long, and Hurst had mostly long pulls in this one and converted 11 of his 12 pulls. He'd had more difficulty in earlier games converting a high percentage of those. So very good game for James. And in terms of who was the biggest surprise in this game, it was probably him.
So far on the offense, seeing what we saw, where would you say, watching this game, is still the biggest room for improvement?
running backs have all their own individual problems. With a fumbler in Collins, West is now hurt. Allen has yet to prove that he can provide decent yards per touch, even in this game. I don't want to. It was not a bad game for him as a runner, but he had 3 yards per reception. He had 3.5 yards per carry. It's not an exciting game in terms of yards per touch. It was just he certainly did help get some of those first downs on the final drive that were of great value in closing out the game. But, he's not an explosive back in terms of what we've seen so far. So if they're down to one explosive guy in terms of Collins, that really isn't enough. They re-signed Bobby Rainey this week, and I'm sure he'll get a few touches to try and see what he can do, particularly in the passing game. And one of those 3 guys needs to step up as a pass blocker and be a guy they can really count on to help pick up the blitz when Joe needs it.
All right, so let's move on to defense. It looked to me as if the Ravens were doing more to generate pressure with the scheme. Where did you see that? What did you see there?
Yeah, they did a whole lot of things with pressure, and that's a good pickup there. They twice split 7 men. Neither times did they convert those, but also both those fell incomplete, largely due to problems with E.J. Manuel getting the ball off properly. One of those was the overthrow in the end zone that, Crabtree had pretty clearly beaten Humphrey for a touchdown. But they in the end, their numbers game and their 4-man pressure produced approximately equivalent results. They blitzed a lot from the secondary. They had 8 blitzes from the secondary, 13 individual blitzes. Now, let me be careful about how I define that, Jan. A blitz is described as someone who comes from at least 1.5 yards from the line of scrimmage at the snap, or no closer than the covering the slot receiver. So oftentimes it's a slot cornerback who blitz. Sometimes it'll be a linebacker who's off the line of scrimmage, or a safety who's off the line of scrimmage that will do so. But there were 13 such instances in that game. The secondary had 2 of the 3 sacks. So Levine and Jefferson each had a sack. And in fact, one of the sacks came on a double safety blitz, which is fairly unusual, where Jefferson and Weddle were coming from opposite sides. So I have a way of scoring for rushes being deceptive, and 6 of the 29 rushes were deceptive, which is up from previous games for Pease. And one last statistic that I think is of use is that Manuel had ample time and space on just 11 of his 29 dropbacks. Now, I have a way of defining that, but I think the simple thing is to say expectation would be about 50%. And to hold a quarterback who is not tremendously experienced to 11 of 29 is usually going to produce good results.
So in your estimation, what is it the Ravens need to do in order to be successful defensively?
Okay, well, they need to find a way to stop the run, and it's the second straight game that they've had a problem with stopping the run. Against the Steelers, it was edge rushes and really allowing the Steelers to get their power run game and their pulls going. This week, it was really just up the middle they got ran against, and there were 2 or 3 factors that were really significant in that. One is that Kelechi Osemele is excellent. Their left guard was a big part of most of these runs. We know him well here in Baltimore, and he was a fan favorite a lot of people didn't want to see go.
Yeah, I loved KO. He was whenever he wound up going to the Raiders, me personally, that was kind of like a punch to the gut. But yeah,
big loss. I mean, they paid him a ton of money. I don't think the Ravens could have matched it, but it was a big loss. Besides Osemele in this game, the Raiders did a good job of getting a helmet on Mosley in level 2, and they did that regularly. Mosley only had 2 run stuffs in this game, which means he's tackling a player short of the hoped-for gain for the offense, which is defined by formulaic measure by down. I won't get into. But anyway, he had only 2 stuffs in the game, and if I had to point to one other thing, the edge setters were having difficulty again against eligible receivers, and that's happening too much. The guys they have in there setting the edge are not always Terrell Suggs, and when they aren't, they're getting blocked by tight ends a lot, and that's costly. So all the running really was inside. All the damage was inside. The Raiders had 9 runs of 6 or more yards. But it remains a concern for me, because if the Ravens allow other teams to get going with the run, they allow the long drives that can cause a lot of problems and keep the Ravens on the field for too many plays. And every game this year, you mentioned the Ravens needed to get the lead and keep the lead. There have been 0 lead changes in Ravens games this year. 0. Okay, the Ravens led the entire time in weeks 1, 2, and 5, and they trailed or were tied the entire time in weeks 3 and 4. So the lead has not changed even once. And it's very important to score first and allow this defense to kind of put its full weight to bear against the opposing offense. They did a great job in this game by scoring on that first drive and then having the defensive play made by Jimmy Smith to go up 14-0. They never looked back.
Now, speaking of that, were you surprised by the activation of Chris Wormley and the healthy scratch of McKusick?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Chris Wormley played his first NFL game, 13 snaps. I was very surprised by it. McKusick had played 21 snaps, did not play well in my estimation, but he also did not get a chance to play where I think he can help the Ravens most, which is against the pass. He only had 3 snaps against the pass, 18 against the run in his first game. So Wormley played 13 snaps in this game. He had a pressure on his first NFL snap, so that's nice to see. And he also had frontside containment on Suggs' sack in Q4. So he was there on the front side. Suggs took him to the ground, and Wormley kind of piled on and got a little hit on there too, which is nice. But solid pass rushing game for his first start.
Now, so the Ravens, you had mentioned, had some trouble stopping the run. How much are they missing Brandon Williams right now?
I mean, the loss of Williams and Urban has really hurt the team in every way. Those guys are both important on in terms of compressing the pocket on the pass rush and also against the run. So Williams in particular is one of the guys who stops opposing teams from wanting to pull. So you can really get multi-car pileups in the backfield if Williams makes penetration.
And then you talked earlier about Humphrey getting beat, but Humphrey replaced Jimmy Smith early, played all but 1 snap. So what did you see from him?
Terrific game from Humphrey, I thought, in general. He did a very good job covering that side of the field. Crabtree went off for a big game, so basically E.J. Manuel was looking for Crabtree the way a young quarterback often looks for a tight end to try and find him play after play. And he did find him. Sometimes he was on Humphrey's side. Humphrey had 1 missed tackle where he allowed some yak, 11 yak. He was in the middle of quarter 1. And he got overthrown on that ball that should have been the TD. But otherwise, I thought he was very solid. As a 53-snap effort for Humphrey. So his first really significant playing time. He's getting a little bit of playing time that was increasing every game. But this is the first time he's played almost an entire game.
And that fumble recovery in the first really helped us out, too.
Yeah, that was Jimmy. And he was there on the third play before he left. And then it's a funny thing. They brought Jimmy Smith back. And he played 4 plays after that, and all of them were in a formation I haven't seen during the Pease era, which is a 4-corner dime, where they, instead of having 3 safeties and 3 corners, they brought 4 corners in against the Ravens. And that's an unusual formation. Most NFL teams use a 3 or even a 4 safety dime alignment.
In your estimation, who is the MVP on offense and who is the MVP on defense?
All right, let's start with the MVP on defense because I think that's pretty clear to me. It'd be Willie Henry. Now, Henry, he had not even played an NFL defensive snap before 3 weeks ago. And during the last 3 games, he's racked up 108 snaps, and he's been the defensive MVP in my estimation twice. And in a very similar game the last 2 weeks. So he had 2 passes defensed. What was impressive about that is Willie Henry does a great job at knowing what chances he has. So he's up against a double team both times. And rather than try and beat his head through a wall and try and get through that double team to get to the quarterback, he took a step back or a half step back, elevated as he saw the quarterback throw and knocked the ball away. One was almost intercepted, and the other one, always has a chance for an interception when you tip a ball. So he had a quarterback hit in the game on the final play. He really took it to Manuel on that play. And they had 2 other plays where against the run, he blew up the play for loss, and he was responsible for 1 tackle, not responsible for the other, but he's just not being credited for a play that he really made. So great game for Willie Henry, and very excited about what he's done the last 3 weeks.
Brilliant. So what about that on offense?
Okay, so on offense, I'd be tempted to give it to the entire offensive line, if you'll allow that. The entire offensive line, we didn't get quite all the way across it, but the grades were A, for Stanley, A for Hurst, A for Jensen, another near A+, a B for Skura, who played very well before he was hurt, and then another A for Austin Howard. Austin Howard's performance deserves a special mention too, because Khalil Mack, the Raiders' outstanding edge rusher, was held without a pressure for the first time since the finale of the 2014 season. So that was really an exceptional game, and he looked great doing it.
So next week, Bears, we're playing them back home in Baltimore. So Ravens, what is their answer for Trubisky?
Well, Mitch Trubisky just started his first game on Monday Night Football. So a couple things are good about this. The Bears are coming back off a short week. Trubisky was not particularly good. He did have a touchdown pass on a deflected pass. He also threw a pick on a very ill-advised pass where he's kind of baited into it. I think he'll make a lot of the young quarterback mistakes, and this is a secondary that can prey on that with the ball skills they have in the second and third level. But the other thing I would point to is that Trubisky is a runner, and the Ravens will need to find a way to contain that. And there's two ways they've been successful with that against running quarterbacks recently. One is to use very controlled rush lanes, which they've done against Tyrod Taylor, and they did against Deshaun Kaiser very effectively. The other is to have a spy if they want to do that. And they've done that. The only quarterback I'm aware of them doing against is Wilson of Seattle, so they could do that, and Anthony Levine would be a fairly effective guy, I think, at doing that on third down plays, so that may be the way they go on it. If it's on earlier downs, I'd say Peanut is probably the most effective guy to handle that role.
So where do the Ravens match up against the Bears defensively?
Well, if you're talking about where they match up best, I'd say that the Ravens secondary clearly is a huge, overwhelming match for the Bears' injured receiver core. So they don't have a lot of options throwing the ball. They're going to have to try and throw the ball short over the middle of the field, which is going to encourage the Ravens to do some other trickery, probably to bring Jefferson up in the box more, to handle more of the short area coverage, because that's where a lot of the Ravens' weakness has been. So I anticipate something different schematically that will present a challenge for the Bears. On 10-yard throws in the middle of the field, and Jefferson is the most logical answer to cover a tight end man-to-man or to do anything else in terms of a short area coverage.
Moving on to the offense, how can the Ravens offense, Roman, Morningweg, best take advantage of that Bears defense?
Okay, so the Bears defense is not terrible, but they have a big weakness right now at inside linebacker. That's where I think the Ravens will try and win. Obviously, the Ravens want to try and shorten games, run the clock quickly as soon as they get the lead, use their running game and lean on the other teams to the degree they can. And right now, the Bears are very confused and injured at inside linebacker, and that's usually where your defensive signal caller is. Certainly is where the Ravens have always had their defensive signal caller. But the Bears were down, had 3 or 4 injuries at inside linebacker in that Monday night game, and they did sign a linebacker already this week, but whoever they've got, I'm not anticipating all communication to run smoothly. So trickery in the middle of the field and leaning on them with the run game would appear to be the two ways that they can be beat easily. No game in the NFL is a sure thing. The gamblers are saying the Ravens have about a 72% chance to win it by the way they're betting their money. That seems reasonable to me, and that's not bad.
Ken, again, thank you so much. Ken McKusick, you can follow him on Twitter at Film Study Ravens. You can also read his articles on RussellStreetReport.com. We love having him on the show, so make sure you check him out, follow him. And as always, we're going to sign off as we always do with Fuck the Patriots. All right, guys, thank you so much, and we'll see you after the game next week. Ken, thank you so much.
All right, no problem, man.
Take care.
Take it easy.